You know that feeling of overwhelming, all-consuming love when your baby kicks for the very first time. What if I told you that my baby wasn't kicking out of joy, but was actively trying to rupture my spleen? I died at 42, shivering in a cheap, underfunded hospice facility, while my beautiful, wildly successful daughter signed the papers to cut off my life support with a smirk. Then I woke up, 5 months pregnant with her all over again. But this time, there was a twist. I could hear her thoughts. I heard my unborn baby plotting to ruin my life before she even took her first breath. So I smiled, rubbed my swollen belly, and decided to play completely deaf. The last thing I remembered from my first life was the overwhelming stench of industrial bleach and decaying dreams. I was in a sterile room at St. Jude's Hospice Care in upstate New York. I was only 42, but my body had been ravaged by stress-induced heart failure and a cocktail of prescription drugs I never actually needed. Standing over my bed wearing a pristine white Chanel suit that cost more than my entire medical treatment was Elora, my daughter, my flesh and blood, my murderer. You really held on longer than I thought, Mother Elora had whispered, leaning down so only I could hear her. Her perfume, a suffocating blend of jasmine and vanilla, made me gag. Don't worry about Daddy. Jessica and I will take great care of him and his bank accounts. You can finally stop being such a burden. She pressed the call button, handed the nurse the DNR paperwork she had coerced me into signing months ago during a drug-induced haze, and walked out without looking back. The monitor flatlined. The darkness swallowed me. Then I gasped. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in a cold hospice bed. I was sinking into the plush, lavender-scented mattress of the master bedroom in my Beacon Hill townhouse. Sunlight streamed through the expensive linen curtains, painting warm, golden stripes across the hardwood floor. I sat up violently, my hands instinctively flying to my chest. My heart was beating, strong, steady. I looked down, and my breath hitched. My stomach was a prominent rounded mound beneath my silk nightgown. I was pregnant. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. August 14th, 2024. I had jumped back 22 years. I was exactly 20 weeks pregnant with Elora. The sheer impossibility of it paralyzed me for a moment. Was it a nightmare? A hallucination before the brain completely died? Before I could process the temporal whiplash, a sharp, violent jab struck the lower left quadrant of my abdomen. It wasn't a flutter. It was a calculated bruising kick. And then I heard it. A voice echoing inside the very center of my skull. It sounded high-pitched, almost synthesized by the fluid it was submerged in, but the cadence and the malicious tone were unmistakably adult. It was unmistakably her. Ugh, this amniotic fluid tastes like garbage today. Why is her blood sugar so low? Eat a donut, you pathetic cow. I need you fat and depressed by the 3rd trimester, so Darian stops looking at you. I froze. The blood drained from my face, pooling in my feet. I wasn't just reborn. The monster inside me retained her memories too. Elora was doing a second run of her life, and she was already plotting my downfall from the womb. In my past life, my pregnancy had been a nightmare of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and severe prenatal depression. I had gained 60 pounds, cried constantly, and drove my husband Darian right into the arms of his supposedly platonic business partner, Jessica Reynolds. Elora had essentially orchestrated my physical and mental decline from the inside out, using sheer fetal distress to manipulate my hormones and health. Come on! Cry! The voice echoed again, accompanied by another vicious headbutt to my bladder. This is the day you're supposed to start weeping uncontrollably and call Darian at the office to accuse him of cheating. Do it! Drive him crazy! Push him to Jessica! My hands hovered over my stomach, trembling. Every maternal instinct society drills into women told me to cradle the bump to soothe the baby. Instead, a cold, dark fury ignited in my chest. She wanted me to cry. She expected the same weak, hysterical Samantha Hayes she had broken in the first timeline. I lowered my hands. I closed my eyes, steadying my breathing. 4 seconds in, hold for 4, exhale for 6. I focused completely on lowering my heart rate. Wait, the tiny, hateful voice muttered in my mind. Why isn't the cortisol spiking? Why isn't her heart racing? Kick, kick harder. She thrashed against my uterine wall. It hurt, yes, but after experiencing the agony of my organs failing in a hospice bed, a few internal kicks felt like a light massage. I threw off the covers, walked calmly into the ensuite bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. I was young, glowing, and most importantly, I had 20 weeks of preparation. Good morning, world, I said aloud, my voice smooth and perfectly stable. I gently patted my stomach. And good morning, little one. Mommy is going to take such good care of you today. Inside my womb, absolute silence fell. What the hell is she doing? Elora thought the panic barely masked beneath her confusion. She's supposed to be having a panic attack right now. I smiled at my reflection. Let the games begin. In the first timeline, the destruction of my marriage didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion carefully chipped away by Elora's demands on my body. She had somehow figured out how to manipulate my cravings and stress levels, making me gorge on processed sugars and lie in bed for weeks. Darian, an ambitious corporate attorney who valued aesthetics and composure above all else, quickly lost patience. Enter Jessica Reynolds, sharp-fit and pathetic, and perfectly willing to lend a listening ear to an overwhelmed husband. Not this time. I walked into my sprawling, marble-countered kitchen. The pantry was stocked with the junk food Darian bought to indulge my cravings. Boxes of double chocolate brownies, sea salt caramels, and marshmallow cereals lined the shelves. Yes, the brownies! Elora's thought voice squealed in my head, a perverse excitement in her tone. Eat the whole box! Get that gestational diabetes going! Dr. Harrison is going to put you on bed rest, and Darian will go on the Chicago business trip with Jessica alone next month. I reached for the box of brownies. My fingers brushed the cardboard. Do it. Eat them, you weak pathetic. I bypassed the brownies and grabbed the massive bag of organic kale, half a lemon, and a chunk of raw ginger from the refrigerator. I threw them into the Vitamix, added a scoop of unsweetened pea protein, and hit blend. The machine roared to life. What is that noise? What are you making? Stop. I poured the thick, violently green sludge into a glass and took a massive gulp. The intense, earthy bitterness of the kale and the sharp burn of the ginger hit my stomach almost instantly. A wave of absolute revulsion radiated from my uterus. Gag! What is this poison? Elora screamed in my mind, violently flipping over. Where is the sugar? I need a glucose spike. It burns. It tastes like dirt and pepper. I casually took another long sip, staring out the bay window at the quiet Boston street. So refreshing, I murmured, rubbing the side of my belly. Nothing but the best nutrients for my sweet growing angel. You psychopath, spit it out. You're supposed to be eating brownies and crying over Lifetime movies. She tried to kick my diaphragm to force a wave of nausea. I anticipated it. The moment I felt her brace herself against my pelvis, I engaged my core, locking my abdominal muscles tight. It restricted her space, turning her intended powerful kick into a weak, pathetic nudge against a wall of muscle. Why is it so tight in here? Why isn't she relaxing her stomach? I spent the next 2 hours doing an intense regimen of prenatal Pilates. Every time she tried to settle into a comfortable position to execute a targeted kick, I would shift into a downward dog or a deep warrior pose, completely upending her gravity. By noon, I could feel her exhaustion. The malicious plotting had turned into breathless, confused whining. This isn't right. The timeline is wrong. She didn't do yoga in the first life. She just laid on the couch and cried about her swollen ankles. Why is she moving so much I'm getting seasick? Right on cue at 12:30 p.m., the front door unlocked. Darian walked in. In the previous life, this was the exact moment he had found me surrounded by empty wrappers, sobbing because my maternity jeans didn't fit, which led to a massive argument. He had stormed out and called Jessica, Sam. Darian called out, placing his leather briefcase on the entryway table. He loosened his silk tie, looking exhausted. I walked out of the home gym, glowing with a light sheen of sweat, wearing a perfectly fitted set of Lululemon maternity activewear that accentuated my bump beautifully. I held a glass of ice water with cucumber. Darian, you're home early, I said, walking over and giving him a bright, affectionate kiss on the cheek. How was court? He blinked, clearly taken aback. He looked me up and down. You look incredible. You're working out. Just keeping healthy for the baby, I beamed. I actually feel amazing today. No nausea, no fatigue. I was thinking of making us pan-seared salmon and asparagus for dinner tonight. Are you free, or do you have to work late with Jessica? I dropped the name casually like a pebble into a still pond. Darian flinched slightly. No. No, Jessica and I wrapped up the merger paperwork this morning. I'm all yours tonight. Inside me, Elora went absolutely ballistic. No! He's supposed to be repulsed by her. They're supposed to fight. He's supposed to text Jessica right now. Why is he looking at her like that? Do something, you idiot man! Elora threw a desperate, frantic punch toward my ribs. It landed, and for a split second, a grimace threatened to break my smile. But I swallowed the pain, reached down, and took Darian's hand, placing it exactly where she was kicking. Oh, feel that, honey? I cooed. She's kicking. She must be so excited her daddy is home. Darian's eyes lit up as he felt the thump. Wow, she's really active today. Hey there, little girl. Don't touch me. I'm trying to hurt her. Get your hand away. I leaned into Darian's embrace, resting my head on his shoulder, while Elora writhed in impotent fury inside her tiny, fluid-filled prison. I was a fortress, and her little siege weapons were entirely useless. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of kale smoothies, rigorous exercise, and absolute emotional stoicism. My relationship with Darian had drastically improved. He was attentive, coming home early, and the late-night texts from Jessica had notably decreased. Elora was losing her mind. This is a glitch she kept repeating in my head during the late hours of the night. It has to be the butterfly effect. I pushed too hard too early. I just need to course correct at the anatomy scan. Yes, the 22-week anatomy scan. We were sitting in the pristine, brightly lit waiting room of the Fetal Care Center at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Richard Gable was one of the top obstetricians on the East Coast. In my previous life, This appointment had been a devastating turning point. During the scan, Elora had deliberately positioned herself in a way that obscured her heart and the base of her neck. She had kept her limbs tightly crossed and her heart rate artificially erratic by thrashing wildly whenever the ultrasound wand approached. Dr. Gable had been concerned about potential chromosomal abnormalities and a heart defect. He had ordered an emergency amniocentesis. The invasive needle had caused a micro tear in my amniotic sac, leading to weeks of agonizing bed rest and a severe infection that permanently damaged my kidneys. I'll tuck my chin, Elora was strategizing inside me as Darian flipped through a magazine next to me. I'll cross my arms over my chest and wedge myself against her spine. Dr. Gable won't see a thing. He'll panic. Darian will think I'm defective and blame her ancient eggs. It's going to be perfect. Samantha Hayes, a nurse called out. Darian stood up, offering me his hand. We walked into the examination room. I climbed onto the paper-lined table, pulling my shirt up. Dr. Gable walked in his reassuring smile exactly as I remembered it. All right, Sam, Darian. Let's take a good look at this little gymnast today, Dr. Gable said, squeezing a generous amount of warm gel onto my abdomen. Here it comes, Elora thought gleefully. Going dark in 3, 2, 1. She immediately violently twisted, driving her back against the front of my stomach and burying her face deep into my pelvis. Dr. Gable frowned slightly as he moved the wand. Well, she's being a little stubborn today. Completely turned around. I need her to flip so I can get a clear view of the 4 chambers of the heart and the facial profile. Darian leaned forward, anxious. Is something wrong? Oh, no, perfectly normal. Babies are uncooperative sometimes, Dr. Gable said, though he applied a bit more pressure. Let's see if we can jiggle her loose. Good luck, Doc, Elora sneered in my head. I'm super glued to this spine. You're going to have to order the needle. Actually, Dr. Gable, I interrupted, my voice light and pleasant. Before we resort to anything else, I came prepared. I know babies can be stubborn. I reached into the oversized tote bag I had brought with me. I pulled out a massive 32-ounce insulated thermos. It wasn't just cold water inside. Before we left the house, I had filled it entirely with crushed ice and a splash of freezing cold lemonade. Sometimes a shock of cold and sugar wakes them right up, I said, unscrewing the lid. Wait, what is she doing? She didn't do this last time. I brought the thermos to my lips and chugged. I drank half the freezing concoction in one continuous, agonizingly cold gulp. The freezing liquid plummeted down my esophagus and pooled directly into my stomach, which sat flush against my uterus. The temperature drop inside me must have been instantaneous and catastrophic. Ah! Elora's mental scream was deafening. It's freezing! Oh my God, it's like an Arctic blast! What is happening? Make it stop! The sheer shock of the freezing barrier against her back caused her fetal reflexes to completely override her conscious adult mind. To escape the freezing cold wall of my stomach, she involuntarily arched away, flipping violently backward. Whoa! Dr. Gable laughed as the monitor suddenly flared with movement. There she goes! Look at that flip! That was Olympic level. Elora ended up perfectly supine face, directly up toward the wand, limbs splayed out, unable to curl back up, because the cold was still radiating from behind her. Perfect! Dr. Gable said, clicking the capture button on the machine rapidly. Beautiful profile. Nasal bone looks excellent. Let's check the heart. 1, 2, 3, 4 chambers. Heart rate is a steady 145 beats per minute. Absolutely textbook. She's a perfectly healthy baby girl. No. No, no, no. Elora wailed, shivering involuntarily, her tiny hands balling into fists. Turn the cold off. I was supposed to hide. He was supposed to order the amnio. Why did she bring ice water? She never brought ice water before. I stared at the black and white screen, looking at the tiny skeleton of my enemy. I reached out and squeezed Darian's hand. She's perfect, Darian, I whispered, letting a single happy tear fall down my cheek. Look at our little angel. So cooperative. Inside, Elora was experiencing her first true taste of terror. The realization was finally starting to creep into her malicious little mind. She knew Elora whispered in the dark corners of my consciousness. There's no way she just guessed that. She forced me to move. Is she? No. No, she's just a stupid housewife. It's a coincidence. It has to be a coincidence. I casually took another sip from my thermos, letting the ice clink loudly against the metal. Stop, she whimpered. Oh, sweetie, I haven't even started. The third trimester hit like a freight train, but unlike my first life, I was the one driving it. At 28 weeks, my belly was a prominent taut drum, and Elora was running out of real estate. Her physical attacks had grown weaker, muffled by the sheer lack of space and my relentless core-strengthening routines, but her mind was working overtime. We were fast approaching the baby shower, an event that in my previous life had been the social catalyst for my complete mental breakdown. This is it, Elora muttered inside my head on a crisp October morning. I was standing in front of my walk-in closet, applying a layer of organic rosehip oil to my stomach. The shower at the Somerset Club. Last time she wore that hideous tent-like floral dress sweat through her silk shawl and had a public sobbing fit when Jessica handed her the Working Mom self-help book. I just need to compress her bladder right when the champagne toast happens. She'll pee herself in front of Darian's mother. It'll be legendary. I smoothed the oil over my skin, my reflection in the mirror, betraying nothing but serene maternal glow. In my past life, the baby shower had been organized by Darian's overbearing mother, Brenda, and entirely hijacked by Jessica Reynolds. Jessica had used the event to parade her slim figure, make backhanded comments about my weight gain, and practically sit on Darian's lap under the guise of celebrating his fatherhood. I had been so exhausted, so hormonally depleted by Elora's constant internal sabotage that my bladder had indeed given out. The humiliation had been the final nail in the coffin of my self-esteem. Not today. Instead of the shapeless floral tent, Elora remembered, I slipped into a custom-tailored emerald green maternity sheath dress that hugged every curve perfectly. It was elegant, commanding, and left absolutely no room for anyone to mistake my pregnancy for sloppiness. Underneath the dress, however, was my secret weapon, a high-tension medical-grade maternity support belt. It acted like a rigid corset for my lower abdomen, lifting the weight of the uterus and creating an impenetrable physical barrier over my bladder. "Let's go to a party, little monster," I whispered to my reflection. Did she just call me a monster? Elora thought a spike of genuine anxiety piercing through her malicious confidence. No, she's just talking baby talk. She doesn't know. She can't know. When Darian and I arrived at the Somerset Club, the private dining room was already buzzing with Boston's elite. Brenda rushed over, kissing my cheeks. "Samantha, darling, you look absolutely radiant. Oh, Darian, doesn't she look like a goddess?" Darian wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. "She really does, Mom. I'm the luckiest guy in the room." I scanned the room and spotted her immediately. Jessica Reynolds. She was wearing a sleek, inappropriate crimson cocktail dress holding a flute of mimosa and glaring daggers at my emerald gown. Yes, there's Jessica. Elora cheered internally. Go talk to her. Go let her make you feel like garbage. I'm getting into position. I'm going to drop all my weight onto the pelvic floor in 3, 2. I felt Elora forcefully thrust herself downward, aiming her hard little head directly at my bladder. But instead of hitting the sensitive organ, she slammed right into the reinforced, rigid band of the maternity belt. Ow! What the hell? Elora shrieked in my mind, rebounding off the artificial wall. Why is it so hard down here? It feels like a literal trampoline made of Kevlar. I can't reach the bladder. I smiled, taking a sip of sparkling cider. I glided across the room, leaving Darian with his mother, and walked directly up to Jessica. I didn't wait for her to approach me. I took the high ground. Jessica, I said warmly, my voice carrying just enough volume to attract the attention of the surrounding guests, including Darian's senior law partners. So lovely of you to make it. I know how terribly busy you are covering all of Darian's overflow work while he's been taking so much time off to be with me. Jessica's forced smile faltered slightly. Oh, it's no trouble, Samantha. We're a team. Although I must admit I miss having my partner in the office for late-night strategy sessions. She let her eyes drift to my stomach, a smirk playing on her lips. You must be so exhausted carrying all that extra weight. I brought you a book. Reclaiming Your Husband After the Baby Ruins Your Body. Gasps rippled through the small circle of women around us. In the first timeline, this was the exact moment I had burst into tears and fled to the bathroom, leaking urine the whole way. Cry, cry, right now. Elora was chanting in my head, frantically trying to headbutt my pelvis again and failing miserably against the belt. I didn't cry. I threw my head back and let out a rich, melodic laugh. It was loud, confident, and completely disarmed the tension in the room. Oh, Jessica, you are always so delightfully dramatic, I said, placing a condescending hand on her bare shoulder. But don't worry about my husband. Darian has never been more attentive. In fact, he's taking a 6-week paternity leave entirely unplugged. Hasn't he told you he said the firm's junior associates, and you of course could handle the minor paperwork, while he focuses on his real legacy? I looked over at Darian, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and intense attraction. I gave him a slow, deliberate wink. He practically blushed. Jessica's face turned the color of her dress. She stammered, entirely robbed of her power dynamic. The other women in the circle, mostly wives of the senior partners, immediately turned on Jessica, their eyes cold with judgment at her blatant, pathetic attempt to flirt with a pregnant woman's husband. No, Elora wailed. This is all wrong, the humiliation. She's humiliating Jessica instead of herself. Why didn't she pee? I'm pushing as hard as I can. Excuse me, ladies, I said smoothly, turning my back on a defeated Jessica. I think the baby is telling me it's time for some cake. As I walked away, feeling Elora thrashing in absolute impotent rage, I took a moment to relish the absolute perfection of the moment. I was untouchable. And the little parasite inside me was finally starting to understand that the rules of the game had changed. By week 32, the psychological warfare in my uterus had escalated to a terrifying degree. Elora had finally abandoned the delusion that my perfect health and unshakable confidence were mere butterfly effects. She knew I was fighting back, even if she couldn't fathom how I anticipated her every move. Stripped of her ability to ruin my marriage through proxy emotional warfare, she resorted to the only weapon she had left, her own physical vulnerability. If she couldn't make me destroy myself, she was going to make the doctors do it for her. It was a rainy Tuesday night. Darian was fast asleep beside me, his steady breathing the only sound in the dark bedroom. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the erratic, calculated movements inside me.
Fine. You want to play hardball, Mother? Alora's voice echoed in the silent caverns of my mind, dripping with venom. You blocked the diabetes. You blocked the social ruin. You've got Darian wrapped around your finger. But you can't stop me from hurting myself. My blood ran cold.
Let's see how much you love this perfect little pregnancy when the baby's heart rate drops to 50 beats per minute, she sneered. Dr. Gable has you doing those at-home Doppler checks twice a week because of your advanced maternal age. You're doing one tomorrow morning. I'm going to wrap the umbilical cord around my neck right now. I'll pull it tight just before the monitor goes on. The hypoxia will trigger a massive distress signal. They'll have to cut you open 32 weeks early. Emergency C-section. A massive, jagged scar, months of NICU trauma, and a ruined body. Let's see Darian find you attractive when you're sliced in half and weeping over an incubator.
I felt her moving. It wasn't the usual kicking or punching. It was a slithering, deliberate rotation. She was somersaulting, using her tiny hands to guide the thick, rubbery umbilical cord over her head. Panic, raw and blinding, gripped my chest. This was a suicidal tactic. If she pulled too hard, she could actually cause severe brain damage or kill herself before she was even born. She was a sociopath, willing to risk her own existence just to inflict trauma on me.
I couldn't use a kale smoothie or a maternity belt to fix this. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Darian. I walked down the hall to the nursery. It was painted a vibrant sunny yellow, a stark contrast to the dreary, sterile beige Elora had demanded in the first life. I sat in the rocking chair, my hands resting on my stomach. I could feel the tension building inside. She had looped it once. She was going for a second loop. Just a little tighter, Elora grunted mentally. Gotta make sure the oxygen flow is restricted enough to sound the alarms. I had to force her to unwrap it, and I had to do it instantly. I needed a biological override. Something so startling, so physically overwhelming, that her fetal brain stem would take over and force her to move away from the source. I looked around the nursery. My eyes landed on Darian's acoustic guitar resting in the corner, and next to it, the baby gifts from the shower. Among them was a high-powered vibrating massage gun Darian had bought for my lower back. An idea sparked. Fetal hearing is fully developed by 32 weeks, and the amniotic fluid amplifies sound and vibration incredibly well. I grabbed the massage gun and walked into the adjoining bathroom. I turned the shower to the hottest setting, letting the room fill with thick, suffocating steam. Then I grabbed a heavy metal mixing bowl from the kitchen downstairs and brought it back up. What is she doing pacing around? Elora thought, pausing her morbid task. Whatever. One more loop.
I sat on the bathroom floor. I placed the metal bowl directly against the bare skin of my belly, right where her head was positioned. I turned the massage gun to the absolute highest setting, level 10. I pressed the vibrating head of the gun firmly against the bottom of the metal bowl. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic.
The metal bowl acted as a parabolic amplifier, turning the deep, rapid percussion of the massage gun into a deafening, localized sonic boom right against my uterine wall. It must have sounded like a jackhammer going off inside a submarine. Elora's thought voice practically shattered my skull.
What is that? What is happening? It's deafening, the vibration. My skull is rattling.
The intense, rapid-fire vibration sent shockwaves through the amniotic fluid. It wasn't painful for me, just a heavy buzzing sensation. But for her, suspended in liquid, it was an inescapable earthquake. Survival instinct hardwired into every living creature completely overrode her malicious plotting. To escape the deafening noise and the violent shaking against her head, she instinctively recoiled violently, thrashing backward and throwing her arms up to cover her ears. In doing so, she unwound the cord. I kept the gun pressed to the bowl for another solid minute. I felt her tumbling frantically, kicking and spinning to get as far away from the acoustic assault as possible, retreating to the very top of my uterus, safely away from the umbilical cord. I finally clicked the massage gun off. The bathroom fell dead silent, save for the hiss of the hot shower. I sat there breathing heavily, sweat beading on my forehead. Inside me, Elora was panting, her tiny heart racing, completely disoriented and terrified. She stopped me. Elora whimpered in the dark, her voice trembling with genuine fear for the first time. She knew exactly what I was doing. How did she know? How did she stop me? She's a monster. She's trying to torture me. I patted the top of my belly, right where she was cowering. Nice try, sweetheart, I whispered into the steamy air. But in this house, Mommy makes the rules, and you are going to stay perfectly safe, perfectly healthy, and perfectly full term, whether you like it or not. There were no more suicide attempts after that night. The realization had finally set in. She was trapped in a cage with someone who could see in the dark. Week 36. I was carrying a small boulder, my center of gravity completely shot, but my spirit had never been lighter. The final boss of my pregnancy was approaching the annual senior partners dinner party. In the previous timeline, this dinner had been the nuclear bomb that leveled my marriage. Hosted at our Beacon Hill townhouse, it was supposed to be Darian's crowning moment before making named partner. But Elora had spent the entire day making me violently ill. I had thrown up 3 times before the guests arrived. During the main course, she had continuously kicked my stomach while releasing a flood of stress hormones, causing me to have a massive, humiliating panic attack right at the dining table. I had accused Darian of sleeping with Jessica in front of Richard Montgomery, the firm's managing partner. Darian was mortified his promotion was delayed, and the irreparable fracture in our marriage became a gaping chasm. This is my last stand, Elora declared in my mind as the caterers set up the dining room downstairs. I'm huge now. I have the strength. I will kick her stomach so hard she'll vomit her artisanal duck confit right onto Victoria Montgomery's lap. I will ruin this night. I will ruin Darian's career. He will resent her forever. I stood in my bathroom, applying a bold, ruby red lipstick. I looked magnificent. I was wearing a flowing midnight blue silk gown that draped regally over my bump. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a queen. To counter her nausea attack, I had spent the entire afternoon pre-medicating. I had taken a prescription-strength antiemetic Dr. Gable had given me, chewed 3 raw ginger roots, and strapped tight flesh-colored acupressure bands to my wrists, hidden beneath heavy diamond bracelets. My stomach was a chemical fortress. The doorbell rang. The guests were arriving. "Showtime," I murmured. "You're going down," Mother Elora hissed. The evening began flawlessly. I navigated the cocktail hour with grace-charming Richard Montgomery,
and complimenting his wife Victoria on her philanthropic work. Darian was glowing proudly, holding my hand and introducing me as his better three-quarters. Then Jessica arrived. She walked in late, wearing a dress that was entirely too sheer for a corporate dinner, carrying an expensive bottle of scotch. She immediately gravitated toward Darian, interrupting a conversation he was having with Richard. "Darian, congratulations on the merger closure," Jessica purred, handing him the scotch. "I know we put in a lot of late nights for this one. We make a great team." Richard raised an eyebrow, sensing the inappropriate familiarity. "Now," Elora screamed internally. "Puke, puke everywhere." She drove both of her heels directly upward, slamming them into the bottom of my stomach with all the strength her 36-week-old legs could muster. The impact was sharp and breathtaking. A wave of intense nausea surged up my esophagus. I swallowed hard. The antiemetic held the line. The acupressure bands dug into my wrists. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, locked my throat, and forced the nausea down with sheer, unadulterated willpower. I opened my eyes, turning my gaze to Jessica. I didn't falter. I didn't run to the bathroom. "Thank you so much for the scotch, Jessica," I said smoothly, stepping between her and Darian, seamlessly taking the bottle from her hands. "Darian is so lucky to have such dedicated support staff. It's exactly why I encouraged him to delegate more of the grunt work to you so he could focus on the high-level strategy with Richard." Jessica's jaw tightened. "Grunt work? I'm a senior associate, Samantha." "Of course you are, sweetie." I smiled, patronizingly sweet. "And you do it so well. Now if everyone would please take their seats, dinner is served." I guided the guests to the table. I seated myself at the head opposite Darian, placing Richard next to me, and banishing Jessica to the far end of the table next to the kitchen door. Throughout the 5-course meal, Elora waged a relentless, violent war inside me. She kicked, she punched, she ground her head against my cervix. She tried to trigger Braxton Hicks contractions. She tried everything. I ate every single bite of my meal. I laughed at Richard's jokes. I held court. Every time Elora landed a particularly painful blow, I simply took a sip of ice water, the freezing liquid temporarily shocking her into stillness, and continued my conversation. Darian watched me from across the table, his eyes filled with a profound, undeniable adoration. He wasn't looking at a broken, hysterical wife. He was looking at a matriarch. A woman who commanded the room, elevated his status, and carried his child with absolute grace. As dessert was served, a rich chocolate fondant, Jessica made one last desperate play. "You know Darian," Jessica called out from the end of the table, her voice slightly slurred from too much wine. "I'm surprised you're taking so much paternity leave. The Montgomery account is going to need a strong hand. I'd be happy to step in as the lead while you're busy changing diapers." The table went dead silent. It was a blatant, disrespectful power grab in front of the managing partner. "Yes, let her take his job." Breakdown cry. Elora begged, exhausted, her kicks growing weaker. Before Darian could respond, I placed my dessert fork down. The soft clink echoed loudly in the quiet room. I looked directly at Jessica, my eyes cold and unyielding. "Jessica," I said, my voice dangerously calm, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Darian's dedication to our family is exactly what makes him such a formidable attorney. He understands that true legacy isn't just built in a boardroom, it's built at home. A man who can fiercely protect and nurture his family is a man you can trust with your most valuable assets. Isn't that right, Richard?" Richard Montgomery slowly smiled, raising his glass of wine toward me. "Hear, hear." "Well said, Samantha. In fact, Darian, I was going to wait until Monday, but considering the remarkable woman you have by your side, I'd like to officially offer you the named partnership." The table erupted into applause. Darian's face broke into a massive, triumphant grin. He stood up, walked all the way down the length of the table, and pulled me into a passionate kiss. Jessica sat at the end of the table, entirely defeated, staring into her half-eaten fondant. She was ruined. Inside me, Elora stopped moving entirely. The realization crashed down upon her heavy and suffocating. She had thrown everything she had at me. Every trick, every memory, every ounce of malice. And I hadn't just survived. I had conquered. I had secured Darian's promotion, I had destroyed her ally, and I had cemented my place as the untouchable queen of my life. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence in my mind. Then, for the first time since I woke up in this timeline, Elora didn't just project her thoughts. She spoke directly to me. You know, her tiny, terrified voice echoed in the cavern of my mind. It wasn't a question. It was a horrifying realization. You remember everything, don't you? I rested my hands on my stomach, lacing my fingers together. I looked at Darian, who was receiving handshakes from the partners, and smiled. In my mind, I answered her. Yes, Elora. I remember every single second. A cold, paralyzing dread radiated from my womb. And sweetie, I added my mental voice dripping with sweet maternal venom. We have a whole lifetime ahead of us. I can't wait to be your mother. The revelation hung in the amniotic fluid, like a drop of heavy black ink, slowly expanding until it suffocated every ounce of Elora's malicious bravado. For 3 days after the dinner party, my womb was a dead zone. There were no kicks, no somersaults, no attempted strangulations. Just the erratic, rapid thumping of a tiny, terrified heartbeat. Elora was finally processing the horrifying reality of her situation. She wasn't fighting a weak, depressed victim anymore. She was locked in a sensory deprivation tank with her executioner, and I held all the keys. You're bluffing, she finally whispered in my mind on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in the sunroom, sipping decaf Earl Grey tea and reading a heavy leather-bound volume on behavioral psychology. You can't remember. If you remembered the hospice, the paperwork, the things I said, you would have aborted me the second you found out. I slowly turned the page of my book. I took a sip of my tea, letting the warm liquid settle into my stomach before I projected my thoughts back to her. Abortion. Oh, Elora, that would have been far too easy. That would have been a mercy. If I ended it early, you'd just vanish into the void. You wouldn't learn anything. You wouldn't pay for the 42 years of hell you put me through. A violent shudder rippled through my abdomen. She was trembling. What do you want? She whimpered, her mental voice cracking. Are you going to kill me when I'm born? Are you going to smother me in the crib? You're insane. You're a monster. I let out a soft, melodic laugh that echoed in the quiet sunroom. Smother you, heavens, no. I am going to give you a wonderful, privileged life, Elora. I am going to give you exactly what you gave me, a long, inescapable existence, perfectly curated to my exact specifications. I am going to raise you. I am going to mold you. And I am going to watch every single one of your manipulative little tactics shatter against a brick wall. You are going to be a good, obedient, powerless little girl. I felt her try to curl into a tighter ball, trying to escape the overwhelming presence of my consciousness. Darian won't let you treat me like a prisoner. She snapped a last desperate attempt at defiance. He loved me.
He always took my side in the first life. That was when you manipulated him into thinking I was an unfit, hysterical mother. I reminded her coolly. Look around, darling. Look at the memories I've built over the last 8 months. Darian looks at me like I am the center of his universe. I just handed him a named partnership on a silver platter. I banished his tempting little associate to the basement of the firm. When you cry to him this time, he won't see a distressed child needing rescue from a crazy mother. He will see a perfectly healthy baby being cared for by his brilliant, flawless wife. You have no allies here. To hammer the point home, I picked up the silver bell resting on the side table and gave it a sharp ring. A moment later, a tall, imposing woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun walked into the sunroom. She wore a pristine, starched uniform. "You rang Mrs. Hayes?" she asked, her British accent clipped and utterly devoid of warmth. "Yes, Agatha." I smiled warmly. "I just wanted to review the nursery schedule one more time before the due date." Agatha Higgins was not a standard nanny. I had spent thousands of dollars to import her from an elite agency in London. She was a traditionalist, renowned for breaking the most stubborn, spoiled children of European aristocrats. She believed in strict schedules, no-nonsense discipline, and the absolute philosophy that children were to be seen and not heard. "Who is that?" Alora panicked internally, hearing the cold, authoritative voice through the fluid. "That's not Jessica. That's not the soft, pushover nanny from last time. Who is that?" "As we discussed, madam." Agatha set her posture rigidly straight. "The infant will be on a strict 4-hour feeding and sleeping schedule. Crying outside of designated necessity windows will not be rewarded with physical affection, as that only breeds manipulation. We will establish dominance and routine from day one." Perfect, Agatha. I beamed, resting a hand on my stomach. I want her to have structure. She's going to be a very spirited girl, I can feel it. But I know you won't let her get away with any tantrums. Tantrums, Mrs. Hayes, are merely a child's attempt to negotiate terms they have no right to set. Agatha replied coldly. I do not negotiate. I dismissed Agatha and directed my attention back inward. Did you hear that, Alora? Meet your new best friend? You aren't going to ruin my sleep in this life. You aren't going to scream until Darian and I fight. You're going to be in a soundproof nursery wing with Agatha, and if you cry just to cause trouble, you will simply be left to stare at the ceiling until you realize your tears are utterly worthless. No, please. Elora's mental voice dissolved into absolute pathetic sobbing. Please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the hospice. I'm sorry for Jessica. Just let me have a normal life. Please. Oh, you'll have a normal life, I promised, my voice devoid of any pity. A normal, miserable, thoroughly disciplined life. The final 3 weeks of my pregnancy were a breeze. Elora didn't dare move out of turn. She didn't try to wrap the cord. She didn't try to kick my ribs. She lay completely still, paralyzed by fear and the crushing weight of her impending reality. She was a prisoner on death row, waiting for the long walk. 39 weeks and 4 days. The first contraction hit me while I was arranging fresh hydrangeas in the dining room. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a sharp, localized tightening that wrapped around my lower back and squeezed. It's time, Elora whispered in my mind. Her voice was trembling, entirely devoid of the malicious glee she had possessed months ago. I can feel the walls closing in. I calmly put down the gardening shears, walked to the kitchen, and dialed Darian's private line. Darian, darling," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "It's time to go to the hospital.
No rush, just finish up your email and meet me downstairs. The driver is already pulling the car around. Within an hour, I was checked into the VIP birthing suite at Massachusetts General. The room looked more like a five-star hotel than a medical facility, complete with mahogany panels, a deep soaking tub, and sweeping views of the Charles River. Dr. Gable was already there reviewing my perfectly flawless medical chart. In my previous life, my labor had been a 48-hour nightmare. Elora had deliberately wedged her shoulder against my pelvic bone, refusing to drop into the birth canal. Every contraction had been agony as she fought the natural progression of labor. My blood pressure had skyrocketed, fetal distress alarms were blaring, and Dr. Gable had to rush me in for a traumatic vertical emergency C-section that left me with a jagged scar and a massive hemorrhage. Darian had been terrified, and Elora had played the victim beautifully from the NICU incubator. "I'm not going down there," Elora said, a sudden spark of her old defiance flaring up as the contractions intensified. "I won't do it. You can't make me. I'll break my own collarbone if I have to. I'll make you bleed. I'll make them cut you." I smiled through a contraction gripping the side rail of the hospital bed. "You really think I didn't plan for this?" "Dr. Gable." I called out, my voice smooth despite the tightening in my abdomen. "The contractions are getting stronger. I think it's time for the epidural." "Right away, Samantha." Dr. Gable smiled reassuringly. "Anesthesiology is just outside." Within 10 minutes, the anesthesiologist had successfully placed the epidural line. A cool, heavy numbness washed over my lower half. The agonizing grip of the contractions faded into a distant, painless pressure. I was completely relaxed, completely lucid, and completely in control. "What did they just do?" Elora shrieked, feeling the sudden shift in my muscle tension. "Why aren't your muscles spasming? You're supposed to be in agony." "Epidurals are a wonderful thing, Elora," I replied mentally. "But I didn't just ask for pain relief." "Dr. Gable, could we proceed with the Pitocin? I'd like to keep things moving efficiently." "Already dripping, Sam," Nurse Margaret said warmly from the side of the bed, adjusting the IV. The synthetic oxytocin flooded my system. While I felt no pain, the force of my uterine contractions doubled, then tripled in strength. The walls of my uterus began to contract with immense, inescapable mechanical force. "Ah! Stop!" Elora screamed. "It's squeezing me! It's too tight! I can't hold on to the pelvis!" "You wanted to fight gravity and my body?" I mocked her, leaning back against the plush pillows and turning on the television monitor to a cooking show. "Go ahead, fight the Pitocin. Fight the highest dose of synthetic labor induction modern medicine allows." She tried. I could feel the bizarre, muffled pressure of her tiny hands and knees, trying to brace against the contracting walls, trying to wedge herself sideways to stop her descent. But it was like trying to hold back the walls of a trash compactor with toothpicks. The contractions were a relentless, rhythmic crushing force, pushing her downward with absolute biological authority. "I can't breathe! It's forcing me down!" she wailed, panic fully consuming her. "Down you go, little monster," I whispered back. Hour by hour, the medical machinery and my chemically enhanced body forced her into the birth canal. She was squeezed, compressed, and physically dominated by the very vessel she had tried to destroy. I didn't break a sweat. I didn't shed a tear. Darian sat beside me, kissing my hand and marveling at how incredibly strong and composed I was. "You're at 10 centimeters, Samantha," Dr. Gable announced, looking over the draped sheet. "It's time to push. Just follow my lead, use the pressure, and let's bring this baby into the world." No, no, don't push. I'm not ready. I don't want to be born too bad.
I took a deep breath, gripped the handles of the bed, and bore down. With the epidural, it was purely a mechanical effort. I channeled all the rage, all the betrayal of my past life, and focused it entirely on expelling the parasite from my body. One push, her head crowned. Her mental scream was deafening, a localized explosion of sensory overload as her skull met the cold, sterile air of the delivery room.
Beautiful, Sam. I have the head. One more big push for the shoulders. Dr. Gable encouraged. I locked eyes with Darian, smiled, and gave one final powerful heave. With a wet, rushing sound, the physical pressure inside me vanished. The heavy, suffocating weight that had anchored me for 9 months was gone. "It's a girl!" Dr. Gable cheered, lifting the slick, squalling infant into the air. At that exact second, the mental link snapped. The constant echoing voice in my skull, the malicious taunts, the frantic plotting, the terrified whimpering, was instantly severed like a radio cable being cut with a pair of shears. My mind was suddenly, blessedly, violently quiet. I gasped, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer relief of the silence. I had my brain back entirely to myself. "Listen to those lungs!" Nurse Margaret smiled quickly, clearing the baby's airway. Elora was screaming. But it wasn't the articulate, hateful screaming of an adult mind. It was the raw, helpless, biological shrieking of a newborn infant. She was thrashing under the harsh hospital lights, entirely stripped of her telepathic power, trapped in a tiny, useless, uncoordinated body. "She's perfect." Darian whispered, tears streaming down his face as he cut the umbilical cord. The final physical tether between us was severed. They wiped her down, wrapped her tightly in a striped hospital blanket, and handed her to me. I looked down at the bundle in my arms. Her face was red, her eyes squeezed shut in fury, her tiny mouth wide open as she shrieked. I knew she was still in there. I knew the 42-year-old sociopath who had signed my DNR was trapped behind those newly formed vocal cords, screaming in absolute horror at her sudden lack of autonomy. She could no longer threaten me. She could no longer manipulate me with her thoughts. She was entirely, utterly dependent on me for her very survival. I brought my face close to hers. The screaming hitched for a fraction of a second as she felt my breath. She opened her eyes. They were dark, unfocused, but the sheer, recognizable terror in them was unmistakable. "Hello, Elora," I whispered, my voice a silken thread of absolute authority. "Welcome to the world." The transition from the hospital to our Beacon Hill townhouse was a triumphant procession. I walked through my front doors, wearing a tailored cashmere coat, looking as though I had just returned from a luxury spa weekend rather than a delivery room. Darian carried the bassinet, practically bursting with pride. Agatha Higgins was waiting in the foyer, standing as rigid as a Buckingham Palace guard. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," Agatha said, offering a sharp nod. "And welcome to the new Miss Hayes." "Take her, Agatha," I said casually, not even looking down at the squirming bundle. "She's been fed, but she's quite fussy. Straight to the nursery, please. The 4-hour protocol begins immediately." Darian blinked, slightly surprised. "Sam, honey, don't you want to hold her for a bit? Let her settle in." I turned to Darian, placing a gentle, loving hand on his cheek. "Darian, I carried her for 9 months. I am exhausted. Dr. Gable said my absolute priority right now is recovering, so I can be the best wife and mother possible. Agatha is a professional.
We need to let her establish the routine so Elora doesn't become overly dependent. Darian melted immediately under my gaze. You're right. You're always right. You go rest. I'll pour us some sparkling cider. Agatha took the bassinet. Elora, sensing the shift from her father's hesitant grip to the ironclad, unyielding hold of the British nanny, began to shriek violently. Without the mental link, I couldn't hear her thoughts, but the furious, indignant pitch of her cry told me exactly what she was thinking. How dare you give me to Darian? I want to manipulate him. Don't let this gargoyle take me. Hush now, Agatha commanded coldly, turning on her heel and marching up the grand staircase. Screaming will get you nowhere in this house, child. I watched them disappear down the hall toward the soundproofed nursery wing. A profound, delicious sense of peace settled over me. The trap was completely sprung. Over the next few weeks, Elora's new reality firmly set in. In her past life, she had used her infancy to drive a wedge between Darian and me, crying incessantly whenever I held her, but cooing perfectly for Darian or Jessica. She tried the same tactic now, but it was utterly useless. Agatha intercepted every attempt. If Elora cried during the night, Agatha attended to her with cold, clinical efficiency, checking her diaper, offering a measured bottle, and then leaving the room, shutting the heavy oak door behind her. There was no rocking. There was no coddling. There was no sleep deprivation for me. Darian, busy with his new named partnership and fiercely protective of my postpartum recovery, rarely saw her during her fussy periods. When he did see her, it was during scheduled, highly supervised afternoon sessions, where she was too exhausted from fighting Agatha to do anything but stare blankly. 3 months later, I walked into Darian's home office. He was reviewing some case files, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Darian, I asked softly, sitting in the leather chair opposite his desk. Yes, my love. He smiled immediately, putting his pen down. I was thinking about the future, I said, handing him a thick, legally binding document I had spent the last 2 months drafting with a ruthless estate lawyer in New York. Specifically Elora's future and ours. Darian took the folder, adjusting his glasses. What is this? It's an irrevocable blind trust, I explained smoothly. I want to ensure Elora grows up grounded. I don't want her spoiled by our wealth. I've seen too many of your colleagues' children turn into entitled narcissistic nightmares who just wait around for their parents to die so they can inherit the estate. Darian grimaced, likely thinking of Richard Montgomery's son, who had recently been arrested for embezzlement. That's a very fair point. This trust puts all of our assets, properties, and liquid accounts under the management of an independent third-party board. I continued tapping the paper. Elora will not have direct access to a single penny until she is 35 years old, and even then, it is entirely contingent on her meeting strict behavioral, educational, and philanthropic milestones. If she attempts to contest it, or if she shows any signs of malicious or criminal behavior against us, she is instantly disinherited and the fortune goes entirely to charity. Darian read over the summary page. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with absolute admiration for my foresight. In his eyes, I was protecting our family legacy from the corrupting influence of unearned wealth. He didn't know I was stripping a sociopath of her ultimate prize. It's brilliant, Samantha, Darian said, reaching for his Mont Blanc pen. It's strict, but it's exactly the kind of parenting this generation needs. We're doing her a favor. He signed his name on the dotted line, officially locking our wealth behind an impenetrable legal fortress. I stood up, took the signed document, and walked up the stairs to the nursery.
Agatha was on her lunch break, and Elora was in her crib awake, staring at a black and white mobile spinning above her.
I walked over and leaned over the railing. Elora's dark eyes locked onto mine. The infant facade dropped instantly. Her eyes narrowed in a look of pure, concentrated adult hatred. She opened her mouth and let out a sharp, angry hiss. I smiled, holding up the freshly signed trust document so she could see the heavy legal seal at the bottom. "Do you know what this is, Elora?" I whispered, my voice dripping with sweet vindication. "This is your inheritance. Gone. Locked away. You can't kill me for the money anymore. Because if I die, you get absolutely nothing." Elora's eyes widened. She stared at the paper, her tiny chest heaving as the reality of the document sank in. "You thought you were the predator," I said, reaching down and gently flicking the tip of her nose. She blinked, startled and powerless to stop me. "You thought I was weak. But you forgot one crucial thing, darling. I'm the one who gave you life, which means I know exactly how to make it a living hell." I leaned in closer, my lips brushing against her soft, newborn ear.
"Welcome to your second chance, Elora. I hope you enjoy your golden cage, because the key was thrown away the moment you took your first breath." I stood up straight, turned off the nursery light, and walked out of the room, closing the heavy wooden door behind me. I didn't look back. I had a husband to love, a fortune to manage, and a brand new glorious life to live. And as for Elora, she was exactly where she belonged. Trapped. Did your jaw drop at that final twist? Because Samantha just pulled off the ultimate revenge against her toxic reborn daughter.